Hello, I'm Terry Turner, and welcome to another session of Embracing Our Ancestors. Today, we want to continue in our series, Where Are Our African American Ancestors? And we want to break the brick wall of 1870 by using the US Census Records. Where are our ancestors? Well, we'll find them in the Census Records. But when we get to the 1870s, we find that there's a difficulty going beyond the 1870s simply because records were not kept in regards to names and surnames of African American up until the Civil War. And so what we find is that we can find records in 1870, but then getting beyond the 1870 records, it becomes a brick wall that we have to learn to break through. And I've come to understand you've got to get through that brick wall any way you can. Sometimes you've got to go over it. Sometimes you got to go around it. And sometimes you have to go under the brick wall or even jump over that brick wall. Whatever you have to do, you've got to get past the 1870 brick wall if you're going to continue to find your ancestors back into history. I think each of us will have maybe different situations that we find ourselves confronted with where we're having to try to break through the brick wall. But I think you must understand that diligence always pays off. And breaking through the brick wall is possible when you really commit yourself to doing that. Let's begin with the 1870 census. I believe that the 1870 census is key, and let it be your guide for searching ancestors after the Civil War. When you are looking at the 1870 census, it's important that you look in-depthly into what's there, simply because many times we see the census records, but we don't look at it and evaluate the people that are surrounding your ancestors and look into who's living close to your family. And then look at the place of birth and what it reveals. Take note of the young women's surnames that are on it. And then there's always a story behind their age. And so as we look at this 1870 census in Burnham, Texas, Cummins Creek, July the 7th is when it was taken in 1870. You'll see all of the yellow that's marked in. Notice the yellow, I've come to realize through research and piecing together the pieces that these were all relatives of mine. Didn't know any of them, and most of us won't know the 1870 people who are surrounding our ancestors. But if we look deeply, they generally stayed pretty close to one another. They lived many times next door to each other, but we don't recognize the names because they don't have the surnames that we often carry. And so when you look at this record that I produced here for you, you'll see that Emily Neal is number one on this page. Her husband, Eli Neal, is on the other page just before this, the preceding page. And so what you'll find is that they're right next door to the gentleman I've come to understand was my great-grandfather, which was Warren Turner. Here, the census record got his name wrong. They called him Wayne Turner. And that was generally the problem because coming out of slavery, many times our ancestors had broken English and they had a slang or a slur to their pronunciation of words. And so the census takers did the best they could to try and understand what was being said to them. And so here he's recorded as Wayne Turner. And then my great grandmother, who is also listed here, is listed as Elnora Turner, but her name was really Elvira Turner. And in looking at this, I know it's my ancestors simply because the baby that's there. The baby that's there was my grand aunt. That was my grandfather's sister, his oldest sister, born 1869. Her records reflect that throughout history. And then there's a lady that's mentioned here with the surname of Sally Davis. Had no idea what my great grandmother's surname was until starting this research, but it was Davis. This is a confirmation. I've been able to trace Sally Davis all the way to the same locations and places where my great grandmother lived, and Sally Davis was her sister. And then the next household there is a young man by the name of Abe Turner, who's 20 years old, a woman by the name of Lucy, who was 60 years old, a man by the name of Gray, who was 19 years old, and another young man that was 16 by the name of Alexander that was also with this family. According to records that I've discovered in the courthouse in Ellis, Texas, that these were the siblings of my great grandfather. Lucy was his mother. That record has been difficult to trace, but from all indication, these young men were living in the household with their mother on this 1870 census. And when you look at the records that I've been able to find in the courthouse reveals that in probate cases with Gray, when Gray passed, he in his probate, Warren was considered, and the children of Warren all had to sign off on Gray's probate record because at that time it was not believed that Gray had living children. And then Emily was also there, and Abe was there, and Alexander was recognized, and his children were also recognized in that probate. Now, if they were not siblings, they recognized each other as siblings. There have been some DNA tests that I've been able to discover that traced us back to Georgia, that traced my lineage back to Georgia, the same town that I've discovered that Warren was born in. Georgia is the place that you will find many people were from in this area. When you look at the 1870 census and you look at Burnham, you'll discover that there's just a multitude of families who were African American that said that they were all from Georgia. And we'll get into that just a little bit later, why they believe they were from Georgia and what the significance is of their being from the state of Georgia. That birthplace says a lot because the birthplace will help you to be able to get beyond the brick wall and to look at some places where your ancestors said they were born on this 1870 census and then began to explore areas, and it will help you also to find who their slaveholder may have been. Just a note here that I think we need to recognize is that 89% of all African Americans during the period of slavery from 1790 until 1865, 89% of all African Americans were enslaved. That left 11% that were free. And so the majority of all African Americans who are doing ancestry research will find themselves looking for enslaved ancestors. And so then in taking note of the young woman's surname, we look at Sally Davis. The story behind their ages was that they didn't know their age. They simply guessed at ages because many times slave owners didn't know their age. But let the 1870 census be your guide for searching your ancestors after the Civil War. Now, special note I want to place here, because if we move forward, it helps us to tie together who the slaveholder may have been. And that's always key in tracing your ancestors before the Civil War, is to know who owned them. And if you look at the name, Ned Coleman was 50 years old, and he was born in Virginia. Keep that in mind, because you'll find later on he is living right next door to a former slave owner's children. And that's a good thing to remember as we move forward and we try to tie together the loose ends so that we understand how to break through the 1870 brick wall. When looking at the 1870 brick wall and looking at census records, it's good to chart through the census records. Put down on a piece of paper all your ancestors and their birthdays and where they were born. And if you do that, it will help you to develop where the brick wall exists in your family. Looking at this brick wall, you'll see where my great-grandparents and my second great-grandparents are all on the slavery side of the brick wall. If a person was born, as Warren was, in 1847, all the way up to 1865, as Julia Brown was, here you will see that they are on the slave ancestry side of the brick wall, both paternal and maternal. If they were born after 1865, then place them on the free side of your ancestry, on that side of the brick wall. That will help you discover where you need to break through in order to find your ancestry. And so the 1870 census is a great help for determining where the brick wall is, understanding the brick wall. And then not only that, it will help you once you look at it in depthly to be able to go and see where you need to find them. If you've enjoyed this lesson, go and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Each week, I'll be putting out a different video on things you can do to trace your ancestors before the emancipation and after the emancipation, and showing you whatever you got to do. Find your ancestors, learn to love them, learn to appreciate them, and learn to understand the life that they had to live. Blessings to you. And I hope you have a wonderful and marvelous day. See you next time.